welcome to those of you joining. As usual, there will be a few minutes while we let people log in, and then we hope to start our very interesting program just a minute or so after 1 p.m. A very warm welcome to all of you joining us for this interesting webinar on Molas. We're looking forward here at the New England Rug Society and Textile Museum Associates of Southern California, our co-sponsor today. We're looking forward to presenting this webinar. We have an amazing number of people interested, and so it will be a few minutes as we let everyone join. So we will be back starting the webinar just a minute or so after 1 p.m. Thank you to everyone who is joining us, and welcome as we allow the audience to join the webinar. And we will get started once people have joined, but a little bit after 1 p.m. I continue to watch our audience joining, and welcome to all of you. We will be getting started a little bit after 1. Where I am in Maine, it's a beautiful sunny day. We still have snow on the ground, and we welcome people from 46 countries who have registered for this webinar. So welcome to everybody. We will be getting started just a little bit after 1 when our audience has been able to join. A welcome to all of you from both the New England Rug Society and Textile Museum Associates of Southern California. We are co-sponsoring this very interesting webinar on Mola art of the Guna Indians of Panama and Colombia with Tom Hanaher. We will get started just a minute or so after 1 p.m. We appreciate your patience as the audience joins the webinar. Welcome. I can see people continuing to join. We will be starting just a minute or so after 1. I will announce as we get started, but we will take all questions in Q&A. We do not take any questions in chat, and we encourage people to allow the speaker to speak and restrain your chats once the speaker has started. If you have a technical issue and wish to chat that to me, you may send that directly to me and I'll do my best. We will be getting started in just a few moments. All right, a warm welcome to everyone joining our webinar today, co-sponsored by the New England Rug Society and Textile Museum Associates of Southern California. I'm Jean Hoffman, and I welcome you to this interesting webinar featuring Tom Hanaher, who will be introduced in a moment by my colleague Julia Bailey of the New England Rug Society. A few housekeeping notes for everyone as we get started. Tom's talk will take about 45 or 50 minutes. No questions will be taken during the talk, and all questions should be typed into Q&A. I will be moderating the questions and posing them to Tom at the end. So please put the questions in Q&A at any time during the presentation and know that they will be considered and answered in the Q&A portion at the end. We will not take any questions in chat. In fact, we will not pay any attention to any comments made in chat. So please use chat only for technical comments or requests for technical assistance. Your view as a person watching the resume can be adjusted with the little view icon in the top right of your screen, and side-by-side speaker is usually the best view to choose so that you see the small video of the speaker as well as the large slides to the left. We will be again answering questions at the end, but please do feel free to type them in at any time. So without further ado, let me turn the introduction over to my esteemed colleague, Julia Bailey.
Thank you, Jean. On behalf of the New England Rug Society, as well as today's co-sponsor, Textile Museum Associates of Southern California, represented by Sherry Hunter, I'm honored to introduce our speaker, Tom Hanaher. In a first for NERS webinars, the subject of Tom's presentation will be a group of textiles from the Western Hemisphere. Tom is an inventor and the founder of Zvox Audio. He's also a collector, having what is probably the world's largest collection of vintage art by the Guna or Kuna culture of Panama, including the marvelous Molas he'll introduce us to today. As you can see from what's behind me, I'm already a fan. Tom founded the Guna Art Society, which has over 2,000 Facebook members, some of whom are joining us for the first time. He expects that his book, Guna Art, will soon be published. So now, whether you're a veteran of our webinars or a newcomer, please join me from wherever you are in welcoming our speaker, Tom Hanaher. Over to you, Tom.
Thanks, Julia, and thanks, Jean. My name's Tom Hanaher, and I've been collecting textiles of one sort or another since the early 1980s. I started with Oriental rugs and then made the mistake of subscribing to Holly magazine, where I instantly learned I couldn't afford the good ones. So I stopped and I switched to Chasuvan saddlebags, which I could afford, built a nice collection of those and was hunting for more of them once while on vacation in Vermont, and heard that this fellow named Ronnie Newman was there, and I went to his house and he didn't have any saddlebags, but he introduced me to, oddly enough, pre-Columbian textiles. So I converted. I sold my bag collection and started collecting pre-Columbian textiles and built a very nice collection of those. And then in the early 2000s, I was starting my own business, needed money, sold the pre-Columbian collection, and fell back on these textiles that I had fallen in love with on the side. But I think 1998, I was in an antique store in Ipswich, Massachusetts, and found an early Mola for $45. It was unlike anything I'd seen before like that. I bought it and I was off to the races. This was about the time eBay came into existence. I bought a lot of pieces on eBay, and as a result, I got introduced to a person who became my mentor. This is Kit Kapp. Kit was one of the original authors of books on Molas. His book, Mola Art of the Sandblast Island, still stands as one of the very best books on Guna art. This is Kit with an inatuleti, a Kuna healer on an island in San Blas in the early to mid 1960s. Notice he's wearing a pelican bone necklace. He started an adventure travel business, took people on his 48-foot sailboat around the area. They paid him to work on the boat, and he spent 11 years sailing around the San Blas Islands, living with the Kunas and collecting various forms of Guna art. He built a collection that was stunning. He sort of vacuumed out the best pieces from San Blas in that 11-year time period, or at least a lot of them, to the point where it would have been difficult for anybody else to get something. Briefly, the Guna people, for a long time, they were spelled with a K or a C, Kuna. But recently, the people have taken a vote and they've changed their official titles to Guna. The Guna people are indigenous to the Darien jungle and the San Blas Island regions of Panama, as well as a small section of coastal northern Colombia. They have an interesting position. They combine traditional Guna mythology and tradition with Christianity in most of the islands. In the 1920s, the Catholics and the Baptists showed up simultaneously to convert as many natives as they could to Christianity. Quite a few did convert, but they held on to their old ways. This is another inatuleti. He's holding a nuchu carving. Nuchus are carved figures that store spiritual healing entities that are summoned for the healing process. Guna art covers a wide variety of categories. Their jewelry is fantastic. In particular, I like the jewelry that's made out of natural things like shell pieces and animal teeth and carved pieces of wood, but they also use trade beads and hammered silver and hammered gold. Nuchu figures are a really intriguing area of their art. Once again, these were storage vessels within which the healing spirits that the Gunas believe in are stored. If someone was ill, the healer, the inatuleti, would burn incense and recite chants to summon those healing spirits outside of these statues to perform their healing tasks. Guna men almost always have some sort of an office, and they can show off that office in the form of having a staff of office or an orswalla. These are often intricately carved, but more often they're just they're more like a cane or a walking stick. But some of these are pretty interesting from the earlier days. Keep in mind that virtually every Guna man has an office, so it's not that prestigious to have one of these. One of the rarer forms of their art are ledger drawings, many of which feature mnemonic devices, little memory hints for the healers in these long chants. They didn't have a written language, so the healers had to learn chants that lasted from 10 minutes to 4 hours by sitting with an elder and listening to him recite them. And this is a way for them to take visual notes that help them remember what the chants consisted of. The same ledger drawings also were used to depict galus or kalus. These are spiritual resting places where animal spirits are resting, waiting to do duty for the people of the world. Some of these drawings are done by a fellow named Guillermo Haynes, who was a scribe for Nelly Cantulli, the prime leader of the Gunas during the 1925 revolution against the Panamanian government. The traditional dress of a Guna woman consists of a muswe headscarf, a wraparound skirt, the winnie beads. You see the little tiny rows of beads wrapped around this woman's wrists, also around her ankles, and then mola blouses. The mola blouse would have 2 mola panels, one for the front, one for the rear. There's a theory going around that a lot of people accept as fact that mola blouses are sort of an evolution of body painting. The Embera and Wunan Indians, who are neighbors of the Gunas, continue to this day, as you can see here. This is a 1940s photograph, actually, to paint their bodies in decorative, often abstract geometric designs. The theory that was proposed years ago, I forget by whom, was that when the Christians showed up and shamed the Gunas into wearing clothing, they transformed what used to be body painting into molas. But I've never seen any evidence of this, and I actually have some rare evidence that it's not the case. These are some drawings or paintings that Kit Cap collected. They were done in 1842 by a tourist who was on a steam packet touring the San Blas Islands. And there's a series of photos of Guna women, none of whom are naked or have body painting, and none of whom are wearing molas. Yet they are clearly Guna by their appearance, their dress, the winnies around their ankles, knees, and arms, and the jewelry. So in 1842, there's a lot of evidence of Guna women wearing things that were not molas. The earliest documented mola evidence is from a photograph from 1887 in the Smithsonian Archives. Some sailor chaps had their photos taken along with a woman in front of a number of Guna people, the women of which mostly are wearing molas, but not all of them. Molas are made using an interesting combination of applique, reverse applique, and embroidery. And I can do a brief explanation of that. Oh, but first, I want to show you, this is actually a mola from Colombia, where the traditional older style molas were made long after the San Blas molas had become much more pictorial. Very simple, hardly any decoration, some applique up on the shoulders and the arms, but for the most part, a long mola that was designed not for a wraparound skirt, but for an underskirt. So much longer, taller than a typical mola. The molas were actually made using primarily reverse applique. So in the upper left corner, you'll see a picture of 2 sections of cloth, a layer of black cloth that was basted to orange cloth. Then the orange cloth was cut away to reveal the black underneath in a way that created a pattern. Then if you go to the upper right, you'll see how various colored inserts were cut with sawtooth edges and sewn in place in the gaps created by the applique cuts. Then in the lower left, you'll see that those jagged tooth pieces were layered on top of with more applique in different colors. And then in the lower right, you'll see that those final layers or patches were then reverse appliqued. In other words, sections cut out of them to reveal the colors underneath. So that's the basic secret of how molas are made. By the way, these images are from Edith Crouch's great book, The Mola. Thank you, Edith. Early molas in Panama basically don't exist. There were very few, if any, people collecting early pieces who were natives of Panama. The Gunas themselves kept a lot of older pieces, but they just didn't last. The bugs, the humidity, the general climate were not conducive to the preservation of cloth. So in 2019, when the Museo del Canal Interoceanica had an exhibit of molas, I ended up lending them 80 early pieces so that they could have a fully representative section there. The point I would like to have you come away with from this presentation more than anything else is that the very best molas rise above being just folk art and become fine art. I believe molas are one of the most underappreciated forms of art on the planet. They are as good as any form of art I know, but they're reasonably priced and fun as well. I'm just an enthusiastic supporter of the category. I've divided molas for my personal edification into three categories in terms of age. Early molas I define as pre-1950, middle period molas 1950 through 1970. In the early 60s, the Peace Corps came in and tourists really became an issue, not an issue, just a challenge in a way. And they evolved so that molas post-1970 are really quite different from molas in the middle and early periods. They're still good, but and in many ways they're more intricate. The artwork, the craft work is better, but I'm a big fan of early and middle period molas. I'm going to go through some early molas, or at least one, and show you some of the characteristics of early molas. First of all, they're large. The British Museum has the world's largest collection of early molas. The average width of their early molas is 24 inches. The average width of a 1960s mola is 19 inches. The average width of a modern mola is more like 15 inches. So they were big. The imagery is often abstract, floral, or both. Sometimes it's hard to tell, is this abstract or is it floral? For example, the one we're looking at right now is a seed pod mola. But if you didn't know they were seed pods, you could easily say that's an abstract piece of art. Another characteristic of early pieces is that they are not finely executed. They were not good at doing curves, for example. If you look at the seed pods, these are really a series of facets or straight lines that then turn corners to try to create a curve effect. The gaps between the applique areas are quite large. You'll see that they're up to a ½ an inch wide. In later molas, they're much more narrow. The cutting is cruder, the sewing is cruder. Early molas are often 6 stitches per inch. Modern molas tend to be 11 to 17 stitches per inch. They also are made on a much lighter cloth. The early molas are simply much lighter cloth. Middle period molas, as I mentioned before, average about 19 inches in width. They're much more pictorial. They're very often using acculturated themes like this Indian elephant mola, where you see the elaborately decorated elephant being paraded down the street. Obviously, a Guna woman saw a picture in a magazine of this. Looks like a man's being trampled by the elephant. That's not so good, but it made for an interesting mola. The cloth used was much heavier. There's a cloth that the Gunas call Atamano. Don't know why, but I'm guessing it was from Turkey, but who knows? It certainly isn't now. It's pretty detectable. It's got characteristics. It's a very robust cotton plain weave, color fast, and has light ridges that appear sort of randomly on the surface of the cloth. showed up in the early 50s, and by the late 60s, it disappeared. It was gone. So it's Atamano cloth is a really good way to date a mola to that middle period that some people call the golden age of mola making. 1960s and 50s molas were very sophisticated, cutting and stitching, but they didn't lose their vigor, their robustness, their gutsiness. They had a lot of fun still. Let's see here. Okay. Late period molas, post 1970, tend to be 15 inches, sometimes even smaller. They tend to be designed for us. By that period of time, Guna women had learned they could make a lot more money if they designed molas that Western housewives wanted to buy, or Westerners in general wanted to buy. A lot more acculturated themes started showing up, as is witnessed by the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles in this piece. The characteristic red of this mola also is pervasive to this day in San Blas. The Guna women love that brick red color, and they make most of their molas using that for the top layer. Notice the horror vacui. There is not a space on this mola other than the framed edge, which would be stitched into the blouse, that isn't just covered with applique and or embroidery. These molas tend to be a little over precise, in my personal opinion. Sometimes they can get sort of a cookie cutter or paint by numbers look, because they're just very well made, but they lose some of the fluidity, the painterly feeling of the earlier pieces. So let's look at some of my favorites, the early molas from 1915 to 1949. This piece was collected by Herbert Hurd Evans, who was the assistant manager of the Panama Canal project between 1917 and 1924. And he collected a number of things, wooden staffs, molas, most of which are in the Smithsonian collection. This blouse was kept in the family and handed down from generation to generation until Herbert's great-granddaughter sold it to me. It's a Cianala mola. The man in the center there is holding two clay braziers dangling by twine from his hands. These are used in both healing ceremonies and celebrations, such as the Puberty Fest that is held whenever an island girl reaches marrying age. Here's another very early mola that's also quite large and may well have never been used on a blouse. It was over 30 inches wide. It dates to the 1920s or 1930s. It looks like a man riding an animal, but that's actually the spirit of the animal rising out of the back of the animal. The cutting, as you'll notice, is very crude, haphazard almost. The width of the channels surrounding the humanoid figure on the animal and the tail. If you look at the channels around the tail, they're all over the place in terms of width. So they just didn't seek precision here, much like an abstract painter wouldn't have measured the width of his painting strokes. The result is a very fluid, vibrant piece of art that I am very fond of. Here's an example of a pretty precise, but yet very early, once again over 30 inches wide, dates to the 20s or 30s. This is a Batasaur mola. The Kuna women like to use metal pots, but years ago they would have their husbands carve wooden lids with elaborate details on them, and they were called Batasaur. And this is a Batasaur mola that's actually quite fine given its age. There's a bit of a mystery as to what these giant molas were used for. Max Allen from the Textile Museum of Canada is pretty sure that they were all commissioned by the people who bought them. US military or tourists of one sort or another said, hey, make me a big one of those. I want to put it on my wall. And I think that's probably the right answer. This is a really attractive, wonderful early mola. I bought it at the Santa Fe Tribal Arts Show about 15 years ago from a fellow who presented it as an Asian textile. It's not. The design to me looks remarkably like that of a serape carpet. I'm not sure that that's the case, but that's what I decided to use as a label. It's wonderful, fluid, colorful, mysterious, everything you'd want in a piece of art. Here we have what appears to be two archaic naked men with some animals in the background, very primitive, archaic looking design. It's actually fairly likely they are not men, that instead they are lizards. And the main reason I say that is because the Guna women are really kind of squeamish about depicting naked bodies on molas. It's way more likely that this was a lizard. They're very comfortable with naked lizards, I guess. By the way, that last mola was one like this one from a garage sale in Denver. A collector friend I know who doesn't collect molas, he collects other forms of exotic art, found these at a yard sale and bought them, and then spent 2 years convincing me to pay not quite his high price, but a little less than that. I don't know what's being depicted here. It might be whirlwurs, which is a device, a stick they use to froth chocolate with, but it may well just be an abstract design, but an early, very beautiful abstract mola. This is a jewelry mola, an ome orma mola, and it's actually being depicted probably upside down in this picture. In the earlier days, Guna women would use hammered, cut out thin sheets of gold as pectoral jewelry, and this is a depiction of one of those, probably from the 20s or 30s, collected by Kit Cap in the 60s. Here's another jewelry mola. Once again, it's upside down, probably because it was flipped. You see the blouse on the top. Because the molas are worn with wraparound skirts, the skirt often covers the bottom 1/3 or so of the mola, so it doesn't get hit by the sun and it doesn't fade very much. So after a while, they'll often tear the mola apart, flip the mola 180 degrees to get more even fading from the sun. This is such a bold, gorgeous, gutsy piece. It's graphically so strong. It knocks my eyes out every time I see it. It's just a great early piece that Kit was able to find in the 60s. This was a giant, I think this is almost 36 inches wide, suluk or eagle mola, collected by Commander Wayne Stuckey, who was a Navy ship captain in the San Blas area in the 20s. It has no signs of ever being part of a blouse. There's rust marks from nails where it was attached to a wall. That piece and this piece were both collected by Commander Stuckey. This is a bucholar or sea urchin mola, one of my favorite molas of all time. It's just a joy to look at. The color palette, the design, the painterly feel, the early age, the archaic nature of it. I'm going to start using the same words over and over again, forgive me, but it's hard to find enough adjectives to describe molas. But here is something you don't see every day, and you probably don't even see it yet. But what you'll find is that in the upper half of this mola, you'll see the cup shapes of two umbrellas. The umbrellas are being held by hard to decipher anthropomorphic figures. They look like men, but they're sort of stick figures. And those men are riding chickens. Looks like they might even be doing battle with each other. And you think, why did they do this? And I don't know the answer. It's kind of crazy. And you'd also think, well, that's the only one of those I'm ever going to see. But you'd be wrong, because here from about the same time period is a complete blouse, once again with two men holding umbrellas while standing up on top of chickens that they are riding. Doesn't get much better than this. I mean, who does artwork of men with umbrellas riding chickens? This is one of the most beautiful molas in person that I've ever seen. It's just stunning. It's another sea urchin mola. I was able to determine that only with the help of Oswaldo Cantulli, otherwise known as Achu. Achu is the great-grandson of Nellie Cantulli, the leader of the revolution of 1925 in San Blas. And he assures me this is a sea urchin or butolar mola. The blouse mate to this, because there's 2 molas on every blouse, the front and the back, is in the collection of the British Museum. This is a really cool mola I was able to find on eBay. It was collected by this guy named Loomis, who eventually became the editor of Yachting magazine. But he got this when he was a young man and took his 20-foot sailboat down to the Panama Canal and set the record for having the smallest vessel to traverse the canal at the time. You'll see the Milleflores locks building in the background next to a dog in the upper left corner, a biplane flying over the locks, and a ship in the lower right. Really a cool early piece, unfortunately fairly stained, but that's true of a lot of really great molas. They were kept by their makers much longer than they would have kept a bad mola when it was stained or burned or ripped, because they liked it. So some of the very best molas you can buy are not in very good shape because they were kept for a reason. The beauty overcame the damage. Here's a stunning side-by-side mola. So you're seeing the front and the back of a mola blouse that had one edge detached and the other left intact. It shows, interestingly, how different colors can change the look and feel of a pretty similar design. Just a gorgeous abstract, probably based on vine design that I can stare at forever. This is the most expensive mola I ever bought. It accurately, or fairly accurately, reproduces the cover of the August 1940 issue of Action Comics, which is, by the way, the first appearance of Lois Lane on a Superman comic. The train carrying the zoo animals has derailed, and the King of the Jungle is about to make lunch meat out of Lois when Clark Kent converts to Superman and saves the day. You'll see even in the upper corner here, I don't know if you can see my cursor, this is where it says 10 cents right in front of the little Superman, just like there is over here on the actual comic book cover. Oddly enough, though, this is by far the most expensive mola I ever bought. I had to compete apparently with Jerry Seinfeld to get it. He's the ultimate Superman art collector. When I say compete, he never saw it, but the dealer was holding it for Jerry and had a Jerry price on it. So I had to cough up some dough. But the ironic thing is that if you have the actual comic book, it's worth about 100 or 1,000 times more than what I paid for the mola. So hang on, I'm getting my cursor under control here. All right, this is a very early and archaic mola showing Nias, or devils, from the Bob and Marianne Huber collection. What I found is that the best molas, the early pieces, were not in Panama. They were in mostly the US. So I sought out early collectors. Bob and Marianne did a documentary on mola making in 1973, lived with the Gunas for several months, and put together a collection of about 1,800 molas, many of which I bought. This is by far the best piece they had, a really wild and archaic depiction of beings that seem to be a cross between insects and humans, almost certainly Nias, or devils. Another one of my favorites, this is a Weko mola. Notice the snake that's curling around the animals or birds in the middle. The Weko is a small hawk that the Gunas revere because of its ability to kill snakes. There are more poisonous snakes in the central part of Panama than any place else in the world, and the Gunas get bit quite a bit, so they revere animals that kill snakes. And these don't look much like birds, but you'll notice that they do have wings, and the one right here in the lower right is quite bird-like while they attack the snake, the Naibi. Here's a remarkable mola, damaged but great. It's an eagle mola, a suluk mola, but the eagle is in a maze. And I've seen this mola 1,000 times, and every time I look at it, I still have to work at finding the eagle here. Up here, you'll see one wing, then here's another wing, then here's the eye of the eagle. No, here is the eye of the eagle. See, I get mixed up. This is a claw of the eagle, but here is the, now I'm getting, here is the eye of the bird. Oh, no, it's not. These are both claws. I tell you, I've seen it a million times. Here we finally see the head and the beak coming down from the neck of the eagle. They're just wonderful how they make you stare. It makes me want to take acid again. Okay, middle period molas from 1950 to 1969. Here is a Nia Achu mola. This is a devil or a Nia who looks a little bit like Superman. He's got a cape and everything. He's riding a jaguar or an Achu through the jungle. This is from the Kit Kat collection, probably from the early 1960s or late 1950s. Here's a wonderful Esnas or sea anchor mola. Notice the chains and the anchors in a maze-like pattern. Notice the wide channels. This might even have been pre-50s. It might have been a 40s piece, but I put it into the middle period as an early middle period example. Here's a crazy mola, and boy, I tell you, in the 50s and 60s, some of the molas really did get crazy. This is probably a funeral mola. Notice the fellow down here in the middle. He looks dead. You can see his ribs. He's lost a lot of weight. He's on a hammock at the bottom. They've brought 2 gramophones that they've got people cranking up to play the music. Then we've got a guy dressed up as a shark. I think that's what he is. And then dancing seals wearing hats. I don't know what's going on here. And by the way, interesting story. Kit used to tell me stories about how he would go visit people that he'd seen years ago, and he'd ask, they would finally admit that the story they'd told him 3 years before was made up on the spot about what's going on in this mola, that they just wanted to pull his leg. So I believe that a lot of what we believe firmly is true about molas is actually the result of Guna women having some fun with us and making up a story. This is what I call a schoolgirl numbers mola, particularly in the early days of Catholic and Baptist schools. The girls would go to school for a long enough time that they would learn their numbers, learn their letters, but they wouldn't go long enough to learn how to spell or make words or how to do any math. They'd get pulled out of school and put to work back in the household, but they loved the shape of numbers and letters, and they would just use them as a design. This is just a glorious mola in person. It's so vibrant, so painterly. Here's a monkey mola. The monkeys are a little bit hard to see. You'll see one over here with the curly tail, then another one over here with the curly tail, head up here. If this mola were 6 inches wider than it is, I would have assigned it to the 1930s instead of the 1950s or 60s. It has an archaic feel to it. This may be because it was in one of the eastern islands. One thinks of Panama being a north-south isthmus, but it's not. It runs east and west, and the east is closer to Europe and further from Panama City and Cologne, so it gets fewer tourists, and thus the old style of design molas lasted longer in the eastern islands than in the western islands. Here's a really spare mola, not so adorned as so many other pieces that came later. It's a Suarwala or Tree of Life mola. Could be from the late 40s, early 1950s. Very fluid. Notice the wide channels around the trees. Notice how the branches of the trees can start looking like bird shapes if you look at them the right way. Very interesting color palette, unlike what you normally see in a mola. Really a great rare piece. This is an example of Guna women saving money by piecing together remnants of cloth to make one bigger piece of cloth. What the woman did here is she had two pieces of red cloth, sewed them together, but they were from a different batch, and one was color fast and one wasn't. So when exposed to the sun, half of the mola turned pink, the other half didn't. This is an atrocimatupulate mola. Atrocimatupulate is a giant dragon that eats the moon. You're seeing the dragon eating the moon, or actually more precisely, eating the embryonic rabbit in the moon. We may see men in the moon, Gunas see baby rabbits in the moon. And that's what the dragon or atrocimatupulate is eating here. Really a folky, fun mola. Speaking of fun, here we have what I presume is a mosquito biting somebody in the butt. Very colorful, very vibrant, very cartoon-like. The Guna women have a good sense of humor. They love to laugh. And this is a pretty funny mola. Here we have a no mola. No is the word for frog in the Guna language, probably from the 1950s. A very subdued color palette. Max Allen from the Textile Museum of Canada once said he had a Guna woman making molas for an exhibit, so you could go see molas and then see a woman making them. And he showed her a picture of a brown mola, and she got this very worried look on her face, and then looked at Max and said, "This must have been made by a very sad woman." They like bright colors. This is very unusual. I think it's early. I think that's one of the reasons it's got that color palette. Notice the dreadlocks. It looks like Guna frogs were Rastafarians, and there's one animal inside the other. And I love the use of the sort of bow tie motifs to indicate water or waves. This is a Father's Way mola collected by Kit in the 50s or in the 60s, but it probably came from the late 50s or early 60s. I'm not sure what Father's Way means. I believe that it refers to stargazing. It might be constellations of some sort or another, but it's a gorgeous, wonderful piece. And here's a Parker from Avon Neal and Ann Parker. Avon and Ann wrote the original book, Molas, the first coffee table book, a lot of color pictures in it on molas. Avon died about 20 years ago, but I met Ann about 15 years ago, and she still had lots of molas left, so I bought a bunch of them from her. Once again, finding early collectors is a great way to get great pieces. Speedy Alka-Seltzer, I mean, this is a great indication of how Guna women loved getting magazines from Westerners because they could steal ideas from ads and articles and make molas out of them. Speaking of which, here's playing cards coming to life on a mola in the form of multiple jokers, once again from Ann Parker. And you can trust your car to the man who wears the star. I got this one on eBay. It's just great. Wonderful piece. Kit's biggest rival in the 1960s for collecting molas in sandblast was a guy named F. Lewis Hoover. He was an art professor from Illinois, and he went down on several trips. He had a very good eye, collected some wonderful pieces, most of which he donated to the Smithsonian. Over 600 of the Smithsonian's about 1,000-piece collection are from Hoover, but he did sell some pieces before the donation started taking place, and I managed to track a few down. This is the best one from his collection I was able to buy. It's a cover from Collier's magazine. See how it says Collier's up here? So probably dates it to, I don't know, 40s or 50s, I'm guessing. Here's a helicoptero mola, lots of military action in San Blas in Panama at the time of the canal. US military had a big presence there. I would imagine helicopters were not a bad way to get to the San Blas Islands. So Guna women would have seen them, either that or they got pictures from a magazine and made molas based on the design. This is a mola that just goes beyond the ability to be photographed. In person, it is vibrant, it's alive. It's a sea coral mola with seaweed coming out of it. And in many cases, the seaweed transforms into human beings. It's fabulous. It's just such a great mola. And back to fun, here we have a happy octopus, probably from the early 60s, maybe late 50s. I love the triangular shapes with the waves in them to indicate water, but the smiley face on the octopus is just delightful. Octopi are a big source of cash for Gunas. They, to this day, tend to collect them and then ship them by airplane to Panama City restaurants where they get a lot of money for them. And they don't make much money, so it's important. This is a piece from Kit's book. It's a Siquiperba or bird spirits mola. You see the two birds at the bottom, each with spirits rising out of their backs. It's got a really crazy, Keith Haring sort of feel to it. I think it's wonderful. And here we have another example of how magazines influence mola design. This is based on Willie the Penguin, which Cool Cigarettes adopted as their mascot in the 20s, I think. You'll see the two penguins, one's eating a fish, the other one's smoking a Cool because it's refreshing. This is a Bayano mountain Guna mola. The Bayano Kuna who live in the jungle, not on the islands, are far enough away from the islands that they don't have a lot of contact with their cousins who live in San Blas. So they don't have as much tourist influence on their designs. As a result, their designs are more archaic. They look older, even though they were made recently. This is probably a late 60s mola, but it has the feel of a 1930s mola. Here's a terrific abstract mola. It may well be a chicken leg design. Once again, the photography just doesn't do justice to this piece. It's full of life. It glows. It vibrates. It's abstract art at its best. I just don't think there's abstract art that's any better than this. Here's a Nusu mola. Sea worms, or Nusu, are one of the worst enemies that the Kuna have because they destroy their cayucos, the canoes they use for transportation and for fishing. They depend on them. And Nusus can destroy a cayuco in one season if you don't protect it with paint or tar properly. And yet, once again, the Guna women use their enemies to decorate their molas because they're beautiful. The Nusu molas are still being made as we speak. This one's quite early and has a wonderful palette and flow to it. Here's a gorgeous op art mola. It's ironic that in the 60s, op art was taking off in New York and other art circles. And simultaneously, Guna women who don't even have a word for art in their language were making pieces that would have fit into New York galleries perfectly well. Automobiles, or Merki Machina, Kit Cap collection mola showing 1930s style automobiles. Very fun, folky, whimsical, great. Here's another one from Bob and Marianne Huber. This is an ake, or hooked vine mola, but really gorgeous. The contrast between the black background and the faded red and orange colors used to design the vine just work in such a dramatic way. It's a gorgeous piece to behold. Here's a fun one. This is a Neapulu, a devil wasp, and his victims. You'll notice that the humans and animals and birds that the wasp has stung are all depicted on its wings as he grins while wearing what is apparently a tuxedo and a fez. I don't know why, but I love it. Here's a classic, what I call Keith Haring style mola. I'm pretty sure Keith Haring didn't have a Mola collection. Who knows, maybe he did. But and this Mola was made before Keith was born. The resemblance between this piece of art and his art is hard to ignore. Here's a gorgeous brain coral Mola. I don't even want to try and describe it. You'll either get it or not get it, that this is great art. Same thing. This is a Timal or Waves Mola. Strikingly simple, minimalist color palette that just pops and wins. It's words fail. Here's another Bayano Mola that really gives you a good idea of how they just didn't care what Westerners wanted. They made Molas based on their concept of art. Here, quite abstract, although the abstract pieces transform into birds if you look at them closely. And in other cases, they look like sergeant stripes. You know, maybe they ran into a US Army representative. But this is an isolated Mola from the Bayano mountain area. There's another Bayano Mola that uses the Dule symbol. Looks unfortunately like a German swastika. Folk myth says that at one point a US Army or US Air Force fighter strafed one of the islands in the 40s because they thought the Germans had invaded Panama because of the flag. I'm not sure that that's true, but it's certainly folk myth. Here's another No or Frog Mola. This one highly abstracted in a wonderful way. The arms and legs aren't even connected. They're floating next to each other. If you look at them one way, they look like eyes and faces. Look at them the other way, and they are the arms and legs of a frog. Multiple interpretations are accepted and encouraged. A great piece of abstract art. Once again, it's passion flower Mola. For me to sit here and try and tell you why this is great is a waste of time. It's telling you why it's great. Here's a maze Mola. One of the more fun kinds of molas show jungle scenes with lots of vines and leaves and stalks, and within them mixed in human beings, animals, spirits. You don't know where one begins and the other ends. You can look at them endlessly and see more and more stuff all the time. Here's a Mola with heavy Christian influence. We've got angels. We probably have Christ or Saint Francis in the middle, bearing crosses in each hand. Supplicants kneeling, angels blowing horns. It's got just about everything you'd want in a Christian Mola. Oops, we missed Scary Mickey. This Mola is from the late 60s and is a particularly demonic representation of Mickey Mouse. It's great. Whoops, I'm getting heavy-handed here. Here's a basketball Mola from Ann Parker's and Aben Neal's collection. I love the faces and the looks of these guys and the lettering on their jerseys and the action. Everybody's jumping. By the way, Guna boys love basketball more than any other sport, more than soccer. Virtually every island that's inhabited in San Blas has a basketball court, despite the fact the average height of Guna back then was probably 5.5 feet. Nope. Yes, this is a Kwalu Mola, a Coleman lamps Mola. They really like gas lanterns. They start way fewer fires than candles did, and they took to them as soon as they were available. American military symbol converted to a Mola, very intricate, very colorful. Kiwi shoe polish Mola, either from an ad for Kiwi shoe polish or from the cover of the little black can that they put their polish in. In the early 60s, politicians from Panama started showing up because the Gunas were allowed to vote in elections, and they would blanket the islands with color posters for their candidates. that were low on words and heavy on symbolism because the Gunas mostly couldn't read back then. So here we have a Robles for President Mola showing a big, strong guy breaking the chains of oppression for the Nacional Party. The Kuna women would find inspiration anywhere they could. They're very competitive. They're always trying to outdo each other. So they really wanted to grab any new idea and make it into a mola. Let's take a look at some late period molas. We won't spend a lot of time with them because I'm mostly focused on earlier pieces. This is a mola I bought about 12 years ago from Adelina Cantulli, Achu's mom. She's a good mola maker. She's on Ustupu or Ustup, very traditional looking piece, despite the fact that it was made in this century. This is a stars and moon mola designed by a guy named Diego. This mola was not made by Diego. Diego is an omikit, a gay man in San Blas, and gay men make molas. And Diego is the best known mola maker in history. He sold a lot of molas for a lot of money, came up with some great designs, some of which were so good they were stolen by other people, including this one, which I bought in Panama City at a mercado. Even modern molas can be quirky, wild, and over the top fun. Here we've got a cow mola or a moly mola with a very spare cow, hardly any cloth used to depict the cow, surrounded by a few plants, just great folk art. And once again, we have Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I bought this one on Mamitupo Island about 12 years ago. You see once again the burgundy red that is so popular these days with mola makers in San Blas. And I believe we're at the point where we wrap this up, at least for the formal presentation part. Thanks all for coming. I want to point out that you can see more about molas and about Kuna art in general on Facebook at the Kuna Art Society page. I do sell molas. There's some for sale right now, auction ends tomorrow on eBay. Look me up as username Nascaman, Nascaman. My website, molamuseum.org, has some interesting articles. And if you wanted to ask a question or start a dialogue, my email address is huariman, HUARIMAN, @yahoo.com.
Thank you, Tom, for a wonderful, colorful, exuberant presentation. We're all so happy to have seen these molas and heard you speak, to see everything from worms to Mickey Mouse and kiwi shoe polish. So on behalf of a great audience, the New England Rug Society and the Textile Museum Associates of Southern California, our thanks. And I believe we will have a word from Sherry Hunter of the Textile Museum Associates of Southern California.
Okay, can you see me?
Sherry, you're on. So tell us
Okay.
just a little bit about TMASC, our co-sponsor for this magnificent webinar.
Well, thank you so much, Jean and Julia, and thank you, Tom, for a just spectacular program. I've had a mola for 50 years, and it's hanging in my house. We'd like to thank the New England Rug Society for their collegiality and inviting Textile Museum Associates of Southern California to co-sponsor this program, and to invite our members and friends and colleagues to participate in this wonderful presentation. For those of you from the NERS audience or first-timers to one of these programs, Textile Museum Associates is based in Southern California, as our name implies, and we are associated with the Textile Museum in Washington, D.C. TMASC was founded in 1985 and is a nonprofit organization, and like NERS, We offer monthly educational programs, discussions, field trips, and special events focused on handmade textiles, ethnographic weavings and dress, oriental carpets, and fiber art from around the world, mostly from non-Western cultures. Our programs feature nationally and internationally renowned scholars, curators, collectors, dealers, and other experts, and we welcome guests and new members. Today, we'd like to especially invite everyone here to participate in our next program a week from today, which is Saturday, February 19th at the same time, 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern, entitled Women Artisans of Morocco, Their Textiles, Their Stories, Their Lives, with Susan Schaefer Davis. These are contemporary artisans who weave rugs, embroider, do tailoring with special embroidered buttons, and it's a fascinating program. If you'd like to have a link to the program, please contact us at info@tmasc.org. That's info@tmasc.org, and I believe that link is in the chat box, or write to Jean Hoffman at NERS, who will forward your request. Thank you again, and enjoy the Q&A.
All right, thank you, Sherry. And on to questions. We have a great number of questions. So, Tom, first, some questions about the makers of Mola. You mentioned women, you mentioned one gay man. Who usually made Molas?
Oh, it's definitely mostly Kuna women, Ome in the Kuna language. Gay men do make them. Not all gay men do, but many do. I didn't encounter that many other than Diego when I've been down there. But at a very early age, 7, 8, the young girls start learning how to make molas, and they only stop when their eyesight fails them and they can't see well enough anymore to make them.
Thank you. And did the Guna initially sell those molas to kit because they did not particularly value the used ones or the old ones, or did they sell them for cash? What was behind selling molas?
Oh, they needed the cash, and selling molas has been taking place since the 20s, when Lady Richmond Brown showed up and bought 1,300 what she called picture cloths from the Gunas, and donated most of them to the British Museum. I've got pictures of from 1952 of hordes of people walking down little alleyways on islands buying molas that are, it looks like a supermarket with molas on all the walls of all the houses on each side of the alley. So it's a way for them to get cash in a barter economy. And it's been for a long time one of the top 2 sources of cash, along with coconuts, for the Guna people.
Again, a note to our audience, questions will be taken in writing in Q&A only. No questions will be taken from chat, and no raised hands will get any attention. So please put your questions in Q&A and I will try to get to them. Please do not raise your hand, I will ignore you. And do not put any questions in chat, they will not get answered. So, can you talk to us, Tom, about the practice of feeding spirit figures, which you mentioned in your talk?
The feeding of spirit figures, I'm not sure I'm not very familiar with that. I'm familiar with bathing of spirit figures. The Nuchugana or Nuchu carvings are they're vessels. They are used to store healing spirits. The Gunas believe that there are 8 levels of existence, and they believe that all illness is spiritual. So if you get bit by a snake, it's not venom that's causing your problem. The snake has kidnapped one of your spirits and taken it to another level of existence. You then need to hire or convince a healing spirit to come out of its Nuchu carving to go into the spirit world and recapture your spirit and bring it back to you, then you will be healthy. The carvings are frequently washed by the healers or the families that own them. And as a result, they have often a very pale, washed out, cool look as the paint that often is on them gets slowly worn off. But I don't know much about the feeding of those spirits, I must admit.
So how about carrying on this tradition of making molas? Are young people being taught the art? Are they interested? What's happening with that tradition?
Well, it varies quite a bit from island to island, but on the Eastern Islands in particular, it's very strong as a tradition. On Mamitupu, I attended a mola making class that was made open to Westerners because they wanted our cash. I made it through about one lesson before I needed first aid, and I gave my slot to a woman who hadn't signed up because I got tired of the Guna women laughing at my ham-handed attempts at making a mola. But the best mola makers I met in San Blas tend to be 17 or 18-year-old women who are unbelievably skilled, and they sew so fast that you can't see the needle and thread. It's just moving like a blur. It's very much an active tradition. It's a tremendous source of income for the islands where they don't have much cash.
And how about the cloth? Originally, or with the oldest molas, where did the cloth originate? And did they make their own cloth? And how about the dyes?
Okay, they made some cloth, mostly for hammocks. They would spin and weave cotton to make hammocks, although they haven't done it for decades. And early hammocks are really rare, not particularly beautiful, but they do exist. The cloth for molas was almost always acquired from Colombian traders that would show up in these rickety, leaking ships. And the traders wanted coconuts, and they would trade coconuts for cloth, for scissors, for needles, for cooking oil, for rice, whatever the traders had. But originally, that's where the cloth came from, was guys from Colombia in ships would trade it. Nowadays, they go to Cologne or Panama City and go to fabric stores and buy bolts of cloth there, or they have their cousins who live in Panama City send it down on a plane or somehow get it there.
And how about as they were making them, did they use any kind of a frame like for embroidery or?
No, nope, they use their hands. They put it on their laps and they sit on little stools, or these days plastic chairs. The old wooden stools are a little less popular now that you can sit on a resin chair, but they do the work on their laps. They often fold the cloth in half or in quarters, so they've got a little stiffer bundle to work with, so to speak. So they'll work on a quarter of a mola at a time, but they don't use embroidery frames or stretchers of any sort, not that I've seen at least.
You mentioned Diego, one mola artist, a very prolific one. Were there any other recognized artists? And do you believe that the mola artists in the past stood out in their communities, or were they or not?
Well, being a great mola maker was a tremendous source of prestige amongst the women and even the men in Kuna society. So an accomplished artist would really have gained a lot of status within her social group. But the names of those artists rarely rose to the surface to become known to outsiders, to wakas like me, who would show up. And I'm sure the same was true back in the 20s and 30s, that they were rarely, if ever, signed. Sometimes they are signed, but really rarely signed with embroidery, who made them. But Diego, there's a bruja, also a woman who was thrown out of San Blas for being a witch. And she was quite a good mola maker. I think she like moved to Chicago or something, and still makes molas in Chicago. And I can't remember her name. Diana was her name. But for the most part, this is one of the many anonymous art forms that tend to be indigenous art. They aren't signed pieces.
And with respect to the use of molas on blouses, were there different molas on the front and the back? Did the molas tend to match? Is it desirable when collecting molas to find ones that are attached to the blouse?
Well, that's a complex question. First of all, to the front
I've
and the
combined
back,
several together.
right. As far as the front and the back, there's usually some relationship, but they're rarely the same imagery. They're pretty much never the same imagery. One of the things that happens is that with reverse applique, you're cutting out segments of cloth. You don't want to throw those away. So the segment you cut out from one side, you'll sew on to the other side. So that if you look at the two panels of the blouse, you'll often see opposite colors showing up, but they never waste cloth. So, but I would say that mostly there's a similarity between the front and the back, but they're never exactly the same. What was the second part of the question? I'm sorry. I had an answer for it, but oh, is it important to collect the whole blouse?
The whole blouse.
I think it is. I think getting an entire blouse is a great thing to be able to do. The market does not agree. You know, I once was watching an early blouse that was for sale on eBay, and I emailed Max up in Toronto and said, do you think this will set the all-time record for a mola sale on eBay? Because it was beautiful. And he said, of course not. Are you crazy? It's a blouse. People will pay more for an individual panel because that's art. That's, you know, a painting is a flat piece of art that you put on the wall. You don't put a shirt on the wall, you put a painting on the wall. So the fact is that individual panels, especially if you have two of them, will earn you much more money in the marketplace than a complete blouse will. But I've never taken apart a blouse, and I never will. And I love displaying them that way in my home in Santa Fe. They really look cool with shirts on the wall.
Further to those comments, there are a number of questions about how you display molas and what your recommendations are for preservation, hanging, and display.
Well, the two most important things I would say there is don't put any glass on them. Not so much for preserving them, even though that does help because water can condense between a layer of glass and the cloth, and you can have some rotten cloth pretty quickly, but more because you shouldn't put glass on textiles. It just never looks right. So I don't do that. The other thing is I mount them on acid-free cloth, basting them in place loosely at first, and then tightening up the edges, and then stretching the base layer of cloth on a frame or stretchers and displaying them that way. And my trick, it's not a trick, is I do more than I can possibly display in my home so that I can rotate them. So I probably have 40 or 50 molas mounted that way. I have space in my home for 5 to be on display at a time. So they're rotated every 2 or 3 months, 4 months. They come down, something else comes up to reduce exposure to sun.
And a question related to collecting molas and appreciating them. Have the designs and the origin of the designs been identified by the Guna themselves, or has that mostly been from collectors categorizing these?
It's mostly the Gunas that know what the design is. They're way smarter about this than we are. We tend to be wild guessers and, you know, come up with a design idea that we want it to be that design, but it's often something much simpler, less exotic than that. Keep in mind too, though, that the Guna women will often make up a tall tale to help sell a mola, and they are unabashed about making up a good story. But being part Irish, I stick by the long known concept that you should never let truth interfere with a good story.
And how about, do you have a sense of the age traditionally when people would start to learn how to make molas, and would they continue to make them for the rest of their lives?
Yes, they start very early. I've seen 9 and 10-year-old girls working on molas, and they tend to keep making them, at least on the traditional islands, until they simply can't anymore.
And could you briefly summarize, you did talk about how you have classified the 3 periods in your talk, but could you briefly summarize the differences that cause you to classify molas as early, middle, or late, please?
Sure. Once again, size is one of the quick giveaways. If it's a really big mola, it's probably pre-1955. If it's got a complex picture-telling story in it, where there's lots of figures, it's probably mid-50s or later. The cloth is often a giveaway, and it takes a while to learn what's an early cloth versus what's a new cloth. But the Ottomano colors are clearly distinguishable, and you can tell it's a mid-60s to mid-50s kind of mola because of the cloth. But a lot of it just has to do with complexity. The later molas are more complex with more details. The earlier molas are simpler. By the way, I've just noticed that in the picture of me holding the giant mola on the screen, right above my head is the first mola I ever bought at that Ipswich antique store, for what that's worth.
And speaking of that giant mola, can you tell us more about what is portrayed and symbolized on that one?
Well, I believe it, first of all, it's a little bit hard to tell, but the top part is clearly, in my opinion, a perbamola, where it's showing a large bird emerging from a 4-legged animal. But in this particular case, the bird looks quite raptor-like. It's got exposed claws and a giant beak. And who knows, there's a possibility this is simply a bird eating a monkey. But I think that it's a perbamola with the spirit rising out of it. Down below, you see a cross between a monkey and an angel. You see the big curly tail of a monkey, and yet the being that the tail is attached to has feathered wings. So it's either a bird monkey or an angel monkey. I don't really know. It's huge. It's almost 4 feet wide. Was framed in cloth. You'll see there's additional applique cloth along the edges that makes it look like a cloth picture frame, never on a piece of clothing, and most likely was oriented vertically, not the way I'm holding it.
And please tell us a little bit more about the stitching on molas. Does it go beyond holding them together? Is there embroidery that is ornamental and contains different kinds of stitches, as many people think of embroidery?
The embroidery is frequently decorative. It also serves the purpose of preventing pouching. These are layers of cloth. If they aren't attached fairly regularly every few inches, you can start making it look like a piece of Indian puri bread where it's all puffy between the layers. So the embroidery often is used to hold the layers together, but mostly it's there as a decorative addition to the design of the mola. And as to what kinds of stitching is used, and are they different? Is there one purpose or another for a different kind of stitch? I have no idea, because I don't tend to pay attention to what kind of stitching it is. I'm looking at these pieces for the imagery, for the art. I used to spend a lot more time looking at construction methods, and then I finally decided it doesn't matter. There's a number of Mola collectors who get obsessed with how many layers does it have. I could care less how many layers it has. I care what it looks like.
And do you have the sense that the availability of cheap, colorful commercial cotton stimulated the development of mola making?
I'm sure it did. If the Colombian traders hadn't shown up with bolts of clothing, the tradition may never have begun. But what really stimulated it, and I wish I would have included some of these images, was the number of molas that are around that are pre-1950 there just aren't very many. There's 100 post-1950 molas for every one mola pre-1950. And that's got to do, I think, less with age than it has to do with the fact that they started making way more molas when they found out that they could sell them to visiting tourists. When cruise lines started anchoring off Western islands and sending boats ashore with tourists to buy things, that's when mola design and mola production exploded.
And do you have any sense that the makers of the molas sketched them out, or were they all done freehand? When the Peace Corps showed up and brought pencils with them, I think that they started to do more sketching, but all the sketching I ever saw on the islands was done with a needle. They would take a needle and do a drawing by roughing up the cloth, using the tip of the needle to lightly put a design in without a pencil, without marking the cloth. They would just rough it up with the point of the needle, and that would be the design they would draw from. But I think the looseness and sort of haphazard nature of many early molas indicates to me they didn't even do that in the 20s and 30s. They just cut away and figured it out later, sorted it out later. Are the Guna women still wearing molas today?
Depends on which island you go to. Most of them, for sure. On Mamitupu, which is considered a very traditional island, if you're caught outside your household, the fenced-in area of your home or your home itself, and you're not wearing a mola and you're a woman, you are fined by the chief, by the sila. Whereas there are other islands where literally only the old ladies are wearing molas, and all the other girls are wearing t-shirts. But there aren't very many of those. Mostly the tradition continues. The mola designs have gotten a little more westernized. They tend to have an open collar that almost looks like a shirt. So they've got a little exposed skin below their neck. So they're a little westernized, but a lot of islands, they're still wearing molas.
You've certainly described the stimulus that Western interest in buying molas has had on women making them. What do you think that the Gunas think about the interest of Westerners in their art?
This is going to sound a little crass, but they're in it for the money. I mean, they really like cash down there. More and more, they have relatives that are living in Panama City or Cologne. Those kids have to go to school. They need school supplies. They need to buy food because they can't raise it in the city like they can on the islands. Cash becomes very important to them, and they get very excited when I was with a small tour group, probably 12 of us, all mola enthusiasts, going from island to island. And when we showed up, the word spread throughout the island, and all the women went to the basketball court. Remember, most of the islands have a basketball court, and they'd set up the basketball court like a flea market with molas and carvings and anything they could sell. They'd be very excited, especially if they knew it was a mola group, because mostly the tourists show up that are just, people. They aren't textile people. So if you're lucky, you're going to sell those people one mola. But, you know, I bought, I don't know, 90 when I was down there, and I probably bought 60 different wood carvings. I had to pay extra for my luggage because they weigh your luggage for these little prop planes that fly you out of there. And I came back with twice as many suitcases as I arrived with.
We will have to wrap this up, though. I'm sure some of the questioners could keep you going for hours, Tom, but thank you so much. This has been just a fabulous talk. So many people have commented, and I think the enthusiasm has been very, very high. Thank you. Your email and contact information has been on the screen, and I certainly am not going to promise that you'll get back to everyone, but I would encourage anyone who has further questions or wants to talk in more detail to contact Tom directly. I also note that there was at least one person who is a member of the Guna tribe and who joined us today. We're so fortunate to have had you, and I hope you will reach out to Tom directly. So again, thank you very, very much, Tom. And on behalf of the New England Rug Society and TMA of Southern California, thank you from all of us. And thank you to our audience today. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you all.